And it's my pleasure to introduce our co-instructors, Sarah Hendricks and Justin Shore. And I'll turn it over to Sarah to do more formal introductions. Sarah, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Phil. And good afternoon. I'm Sarah Hendricks, and I'd like to welcome you to part one of the Florida Commuter Choice Certificate Program module. It's entitled Engaging Employers and Developers in TDM through LEAD, Best Workplaces for Commuters Sites, and other recognition programs. So the idea for this module came about from knowing that there are several recognition programs out there that reward organizations for engaging in various actions that can result in making the transportation environment easier for people to use public transit, for walking and bicycling, and using other forms of transportation. So unlike trip reduction ordinances that are regulations that require a worksite or a property to comply with certain requirements, these recognition programs that we're going to talk about today are voluntary. This module is actually divided into 2 sessions, and to give you an overview of the entire module, we're going to be covering 3 different programs, and these include the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEAD program, also the Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating System, known as STARS, and this is under the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, known as ASHE, and that's applied to colleges and universities. We're also going to talk about best workplaces for commuters, best sites. We're going to talk about the Transportation Demand Management Institute's Green Transportation Resource Directory, and we're also going to discuss how to create and implement effective transportation surveys, because surveys are used by these recognition programs. So I have the pleasure of introducing 2 speakers who will be your presenters today to talk about the LEAD program, the TDMI Green Transportation Resource Directory, and also talk about transportation surveys. First, I'd like to introduce Justin Shore, who is principal of Wells & Associates in Silver Spring, Maryland. Justin has over 2 decades of TDM experience in communities all over the United States. His skills span TDM program development and management, employer outreach and implementation, residential outreach and commuter support, development-based trip reduction, and much more. And I'd also like to introduce Peggy Schwartz, who has helped prepare today's presentation, and she may be joining us a little bit later in this session. Peggy Schwartz is Executive Director of Transportation Action Partnership in Rockville, Maryland. Peggy has almost 30 years of experience with TDM, working in the private sector with developers and property managers, also in the public sector at local government planning agencies, and also with nonprofit organizations. Peggy is a national board member of the Association for Commuter Transportation, also known as ACT, and along with Justin, Peggy and Justin are co-chairs of ACT's Sustainable Real Estate Development Council. So, as these recognition programs are becoming more established and accepted, TDM has a lot to offer, and these programs are a way for TDM professionals to provide services to their members or to developers, property owners, and employers in their service areas. So our learning objectives for this module are to understand the benefits to employers and developers for meeting requirements of recognition programs, identifying the linkage between employee survey responses to program scoring and how to increase response rates, and also to know how to enter your services into TDMI's Green Building Resource Directory. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Justin. Justin?
Sarah, thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction. Before I start going into leadership in energy and environmental design, or LEAD, I'd like to just share my story about why I find this topic so interesting. Probably like a lot of the folks on this webinar today, or in this class today, I started out in TDM doing more traditional employer outreach, and I had just gotten out of planning school, had my city planning degree, and pretty quickly came to realize that the reason I was doing this employer outreach was because somebody, 20, 30 years ago, or 20, 30 years prior to that, had done some really bad planning and left us in a situation where people had to drive and where there weren't a lot of choices to get to and from buildings. And so you're kind of left with TDM as a Band-Aid. And what I love about LEED is that it's making, as Sarah mentioned, this an incentive for buildings to incorporate TDM into it from the beginning. In some instances, certainly with new construction, and gives additional motivation to those that are retrofitting their buildings, their existing buildings, a reason to do TDM as well. So now that we kind of know exactly what LEED stands for, as you can see on this slide, it's something that is managed and overseen by the U.S. Green Building Council. And the USGBC, as it's more affectionately called, its mission is to transform the way buildings and communities are designed, built, and operated, which would enable an environmentally and socially responsible, healthy, and prosperous environment. Long story short, it's about the buildings, and it's about the operations of those buildings being more efficient. And what they've come to understand is that a big part of that is not just once you're in the building, but getting people to and from the building, and that's where TDM starts to play a big role. There's a number of types of different certification for LEED, and you can see all of them here. The ones that have the biggest focus on TDM are two, and they've been called different things with different versions, and you can see here there's an older version from 2009, and the most recent version is 2004. The B, D, and C is really focused on new construction, and the O plus M, or operations and maintenance, is on existing buildings and getting them to operate more efficiently. So why do developers and building owners even bother to do LEED is the big question. If nobody was doing it, there really wouldn't be much reason to have this webinar today. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about why they even do it. And there's a high return on investment for developers and property owners. And we're going to go through some of the statistics just that USGBC has captured over the years that give you a feel for why they even invest the time and energy into getting it. And it is a time-intensive effort to get LEED certification. But you can see for 2% investment in green building design results in life cycle savings of 20% in total construction costs. Their sales prices can be 10% higher, and that's for new construction. Thought we'd stop just for a second before we start rattling off on a bunch of other statistics. The question for all of you, and we're going to bring a poll over in a second for you all to answer and to give us a feel for where everybody is on LEED, but which of the following do you think are benefits of green buildings to property owners? And we're going to bring up a poll here in a second that you can answer just so we can see where everybody kind of stands on that. Phil, is that something, do we just drag that? There we go, thank you. So if everybody on the call could just take a quick second and plug that in, that's great. Yeah, Phil, I think the poll may have disappeared. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that now. All right. So you can see we have a couple choices here, and we'll give you another couple seconds for folks to fill this out. We have increasing rent. So the question is, which of the following do you think are benefits of green buildings to property owners? And Most folks here are saying reduce their energy consumption cost, and that is absolutely true. Access local incentives. We got a few folks that think that. Increasing the value of the building. We've got a bunch of folks that have said that as well. Achieving higher building occupancies. Doesn't seem like folks are latching onto that, or increasing rental rates, which is interesting because what we're going to talk about on the next slide is that really those things that had the lowest response rate, the 0, are those things that they are most interested in. These are the reasons why employers are doing. I mean, certainly they want to reduce their energy consumptions, but when they think of the benefits of their building, it's about the fact that they can charge you more to occupy the space, and they can fill that space more quickly. It's become a marketing tool for them. So our next slide, we could talk a little bit about what those, in more specific terms, what green buildings, and in particular LEED certified buildings, are getting. So a LEED building can get $11 per square foot higher rent rates than that of their non-LEED peers. So that gives them a significant profit margin over other buildings. And also a higher occupancy, 4.1% higher. Now that may not sound like much, but if a developer or a property manager can be anything over 90% occupied, they're feeling like they're in good shape. So if they're waffling between 85 and 90%, and because they had LEED, that pushes them into the 90% occupancy level, that's gold for them. So it's really important, I think, to understand as you're talking with developers that these are the things that really affect their bottom line. Now, maybe the early adopters did it because of the energy costs, and certainly that is a big part of it from an operations standpoint as well. They do want to manage their operating costs, but a lot of new buildings have those qualities anyway with new technology. The LEED gets them the rent and the occupancy that they're looking for. But again, I think it's not to say, I think 70% of you were also correct when we talked about the benefits being some of their operating costs. And they do see operating costs. LEED buildings are significantly lower. New construction is 13 to 14% lower than other buildings. Existing buildings don't have all the new technology and all the new design, but still are able to achieve almost 9% lower operating costs than buildings that are not LEED. But the rest of these are what we talked about. The occupancy rates go up. Building value goes up because the occupancy rates are up, and therefore the rents go up. So all of that leads to a positive return on investment, whether it's new construction or existing buildings for different developers. So when you break that down, it has to be driven from somewhere. So you have tenants, you have different employers that want to occupy buildings that have essentially come to associate green and LEED buildings with Class A office space, and they won't necessarily think of occupying space unless it is green. That is now the new Class A. And the reason that's happening is because most of the employers that are occupying those spaces have employees who are asking for it. They demand it. They're basically attracting and retaining employees that where the majority, 98%, aspire to work in a greener office, or 67% want to work in an environmentally friendly workplace. This is going back about 4 years, but 92% of new college grads want to work for a green company, and 81% of grads would choose a green company over another. So it trickles all the way down. Employers are looking to hire the best and brightest employees. They are demanding green space to work in, and therefore those employers are demanding it of their tenants. I mean, of the property managers where they want to lease space. Another driver behind reducing or going for LEED certification is that it helps them reduce the need to build parking. And these are just some national average numbers on what it costs to park a structured space above ground. And the national average is about $18,000, $19,000 per space. I can tell you in DC it's probably more like $25,000 to $8,000 a space, and that's just above ground. When you go underground, these numbers double. And so for every space you can save them, you're saving them tens of thousands of dollars. And by having these LEED programs in place, and we'll talk about having TDM as part of that, they can certainly reduce their demand for parking and the need for parking and the costs that go along with it. They're also looking at ways to increase their access to labor force. This is something probably all of us in the industry talk about, and talk about how we can use TDM to attract and retain people that may not otherwise have access to jobs in those buildings, and that's certainly part of it as well. Yes?
Justin, we do have a question. Is this a surface lot or a garage? I believe from the last slide.
Yeah. No, it is a garage. So those costs are for garages, structured, so it's $18,000 a space of a structured garage. And then the numbers that I was giving you where you go underground are also a structured garage, and that's where it goes, anywhere from 40 to 50,000. Great question. Okay. So I think the most important thing to talk about is, so we've hit on the value that LEED has to developers and to properties. But then, okay, the question is, what's the value of TDM to developments and to properties? And I think before we, I can't remember, Phil, I think I might have gotten out of order here, but we can jump to the, yeah. Wanted to check in with you guys, pause for a bit before we jump into the next section and ask you all what you think are the maximum number of points you can get toward LEED certification through TDM. Because this, this is one of the drivers behind why people would pursue or look to TDM to help them get their LEED certification. Give you guys a couple more seconds. So what we have listed here is everything from 10 points to 25 points. And got some folks here that seem to know what they've been through this before. The first three are all correct in varying degrees. If you are looking at, and we'll talk about this as we go through this presentation, if you're looking at LEED for new construction, you can get up to 12 points for things that are related to TDM, and those are things like having bike parking and bus shelters and carpool parking and electric vehicle parking, etc. They're more tangible physical infrastructure types of things that we associate with TDM. And for the type of LEED that is applied in an existing building, or the LEED EBOM, it's called, existing building operations and maintenance, you can get up to 15 points. So folks that answered 10, you were right, because, well, it's not the maximum, but it certainly falls within the range of the other two. But 12 is correct if you are looking for pursuing new construction, and 15 is correct if you're looking for existing building. It would be great. I think everybody who answered 20 and 25, I agree with you guys. It should be that high. I think we should give more points for TDM. But for now, it's 12 and 15, depending on whether you're doing new construction or existing buildings. And so we'll talk a little bit about primarily the existing building side today. As Sarah mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it hinges a lot on your ability to survey your tenants and get a very high response rate. And that's something a lot of us in this industry already do and are pretty good at. So the opportunity for all of us in the TDM industry, based on what we just went over with those points, is that if you can identify existing buildings that are seeking LEED certification, you can help them achieve that certification pretty significantly. We'll talk a little bit about what that means potential 15 points, how far along does that get you towards your LEED certification? So there's an opportunity to reach out to those folks and to help them understand where you provide them points and how to help them obtain LEED certification. Some of them, in the existing building, they may have had the same building for the last 20 years, and they're not even realizing that they could get LEED certification for their building. They may be thinking it's only for new construction. And you can help them understand not just that the points are available, but that you have the tools to help them get a significant number of them. And then the last part of it that I think is the opportunity is so many of us spend our time knocking on the door, making phone calls, trying to get people, begging them to listen to us about the value of TDM for their businesses and for their buildings. And in this scenario, we can ultimately have those folks knocking on your door, asking you for help instead of you begging them. And that's the kind of position we want to put all ourselves in, which is way more fun than begging people to even just listen to your voicemail. So we'll take another minute here for a pause to understand a little bit about all of your communities and ask you to fill this poll out. In your community, which type of LEED certification seems to be more popular? Is it for new construction? Is it for existing buildings? Is it for neighborhood development? Is it for new homes? Or maybe you're just not sure. All right. Well, it looks like we have a nice split here. It is hard to tell, if you're not swimming in this stuff every day, it's certainly not easy to know, and I can understand why some folks are not sure. But as we look at the top two, I think this is fairly representative of what is going on in the market. Most of the new buildings out there that are being constructed with LEED as a standard. LEED Silver is kind of become the base minimum, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And then to a lesser extent, people are retrofitting their buildings and going for LEED certification for existing buildings and operations and maintenance. So it's good to know that that's, all of you are kind of experiencing it in the same way that it's happening across a lot of the country. So I think, as I mentioned, so although a lot of the LEED points are focused on new construction, the opportunity for you to show the greatest value is in existing buildings. And the reason I'll focus on for just a moment is that with new construction, typically your architect or your civil engineer is already thinking about, well, where am I going to put a bike storage facility, or where am I going to put bike lockers, or where am I going to place the bus shelter on this property, or when they're divvying up the garage to put different parking spaces in, they're already designing the TDM elements in that, carpool spaces, etc. So I think, yes.
Yeah, I think you have a question
Okay.
on existing buildings. What seems to be the desire to start low and make way up over time for platinum? Is that the way it works?
I think people are going in trying to get as much as they can, which is why I think we have such a great sales opportunity, because to the extent that we can go in and show them, as we're about to, you can get up to 15 points. That could be the difference between gold, silver and gold, or gold and platinum. Great question. So for all those reasons, we're going to focus on the existing building certification. Yeah, so we have one more polling, well, not one more, but this is another polling question. In your area, we want to get a better understanding where all of you are coming from. What's driving the growth of green building? And this is sort of an open-ended question. Take a minute or so for you guys to fill that in. Is it really just about staying competitive in the market? Is it about design? I don't want to read you, kind of lead you guys down a specific direction, but. So we've got it's the right thing to do. You get a competitive edge, return on investment. Yeah, hop on the bandwagon. Focus on sustainability. Desire to capitalize on outdoors tourism. Sure. Yeah, I think these are all kind of need to stay competitive. These are all kind of what I think we see across the country, is that it's certainly popular to do green things with your buildings, and sustainability is something that everybody's trying to do and do their part to help, with climate change and other things. But at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, it is starting to become more of a thing where those buildings are the nicer buildings, and those are the buildings people want to be in, and therefore they want to pay higher rents for, and so everybody else needs to do it to stay competitive. It's kind of a wonderful market-driven way to be environmentally sensitive. But it's very interesting to see. Yeah.
We have another question from Lisa. She says, you had said to find out who is working toward LEED certification. How do you do that? Is there a listing that the USGBC keeps in shares, or is there some other place to look?
There is, and when we do more of a half-day workshop, we actually go into pointing you to that link where you can find all that information and giving you the exercise of identifying the folks that are in your region or in your jurisdiction that you could better serve. And I see Peggy typing something. Peggy Schwartz has a lot of information on this as well, and she may have some insights to share beyond what I just shared. But we could send that link out to everybody, Sarah, after the presentation.
All right.
Cool. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we'll move on to the next slide. All right. And I'm sorry. Did Peggy have I saw Peggy typing, but I can't see if it came up. Okay. So I think if you look at here, some of the possible answers: growing environmental awareness, wanting to reduce costs, local incentives. That's also a reason people do it. Thank you, Peggy. Peggy just posted the link there that we've often used in our workshops that will give you that listing. Thanks, Peggy. So kind of consistent. I think you guys were more focused on the bottom line, which I think is also important, and that's definitely some of the answers that fall into the other category that were not listed here. So moving on with LEED 4, and so again, now we're focused on operations and maintenance for existing buildings. And this is where you can start to see, as I mentioned, that in order to get certified for just basic level, you need 40 to 49 points for LEED EBOM, as it's called. And if you look to the left, you can see that location and transportation, which is the TDM points, are 15 possible points. Oh, thank you, guys. And so if you just do some rough math off the top of your head, that's close to 40%. I think it's 38% of the possible points that you could get. Of the points you would need to get certified, you could get from location and transportation points. And you can see even as you go up, the number as you get more in the gold range of 60 points, it's still 25% of the points that you would need to get gold LEED certified are coming from location and transportation. So a very significant portion, and this is why we think we have such a compelling story to tell and a compelling reason for people to take you up on TDM as something that can help them get their certification. So I think this is our last poll, but it's important to kind of understand in your community, because this is a big part of it. Do you currently administer, or maybe not currently at this moment, but do you in some capacity administer a commute survey to the clients you serve? And overwhelmingly, the answer seems to be yes, universally. Keep coming, keep coming. Got 100% response. This is wonderful. So this is great, everybody. I mean, that's kind of why we assumed that this is such a relevant topic. The surveys that you all do are key to getting these points. Everything revolves around being able to deliver a survey that has the questions that relate back to what the U.S. Green Building Council is seeking, but also being able to get a high response rate. And we'll talk about that in the slides that come up here. So one way through the transportation points to get the points is through just doing a transportation survey. And you can see you get 1 point for the survey. You need to survey the entire population of a regular building occupancy. In that case, there's no minimum response required, but 30% of the response allows extrapolation of the non-SOV rate to respondents, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can see on the table to the right that the higher your response rate, the more full value you can get. So let's just say you could qualify for 15 points. If your response rate was at least 60% or higher, you would get all of those 15 points. If your response rate was anything lower, you can see in that table that the value of those points starts to go down, proportionate to your response rate. And then underneath 30, you don't get any. Yes.
Oh, there was actually another question that I almost missed. So the question is, what if an employer checks TDM as part of their lead but doesn't actually do any TDM?
That's a great question. So I think really at the end of the day, the survey is what's going to tell whether you're doing something. And I think that's where it starts to come to light that I really think that those are intended to demonstrate the tactics that are being used to achieve the result. But I don't know that they're going to rip the plaque off your wall, if that was the question. I don't think that's really the intent of it, but I think they connect that checkbox with these results as a means to get there. And Peggy, who I have to admit she's LEED certified, and so Peggy's a great resource for these things, and I can see that she's typing. She may have some additional insights on that as well.
Are you able to hear me?
I am.
Yeah, so I think one thing also to bear in mind that the buildings need to get recertified every 5 years. So if they say they're doing something with their initial certification and they get their certification, that might come to light during a recertification process.
Excellent point. And that ties nicely into the last bullet on this slide, which is that you need to complete a survey at least once every 5 years. And so as you're going for your recertification and you're resurveying, not only would it show up as not necessarily impacting your results, but it would show up in the way Peggy's saying as they audit it to determine what you're actually doing. So this next slide is really giving you, I know it's hard to read, but this is a sample of the type of survey questions that need to be asked in order to have it be a qualified survey. And as you can see, this is the Rule 2202 survey. That was what the LEED community of the U.S. Green Building Council determined was the standard. Although Peggy and myself and Nick Ramphos with TDMI did meet with USGBC several years ago and asked them to consider other instruments that are just as valid. The big difference between what you may see in your typical survey and what's in here is that in addition to just mode information, there is reference to the level of emissions that your vehicle might emit. And so if you have a low emitting or an electric vehicle or otherwise, that also plays into this survey. So for those of us that are TDM purists that are all just about the traffic congestion, I know this makes the hair on my neck stand up, but it is, for LEED, it is about ultimately your impact on the environment. And so if your car is not polluting, that's also, even though it may be adding to the traffic, it does count. And so again, there are other instruments that have been sanctioned by LEED, but this is the one that is the base standard. So this is option 2, is what I've been talking about all along, the points that you can get depending on your the rate at which people are not driving to the site. And so, as you saw, with option 2, you need to at least have done option 1, which is do the survey. The survey starts with the baseline assumption that 100% of the people are driving alone, and then you're subtracting out from that. And so you also need to take into account seasonal variations.
Justin, we have a,
Yes.
a question. Is motorcycle considered a non-SOV mode?
I'm going to go back to the slide that you can see. I don't know if you guys can see all the little bitty details on here.
It does say on B under mode of transportation.
Correct.
It is hard to see.
So, right.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm not how do I shrink this back down, Sarah? Is that, oh, here we go. Never mind. Nope. I got it. It's hard for you to, there you go. So on the USGBC Alternative Transportation Calculator, you can see how all of the different elements of participation are factored into getting you your actual point value. And so it takes into consideration, how many occupants are in the building, how many actually were required to have the survey, how many actually received the survey, and so you get ultimately down to your response rate, which then gives you the opportunity to extrapolate out your points. It's probably worth a moment here to pause. There seems to be a little back and forth going on about the motorcycle, and I can't quite keep up with all the conversation here, but I think there's some question about whether or not motorcycles are, really should count. And Peggy, I don't know if you have thoughts other than what's been considered part of the traditional survey instrument as to why it's handled that way.
One thing I would suggest is going to a website called leaduser.org, because there's a lot of discussion on there with regards to motorcycles and how they're considered for lead purposes, which are different than the TDM kind of surveys that so many of us are involved with.
Great. So this lead calculator is something you can find online as well, and again, it breaks down all of the different types of responses you get so that you can come up with ultimately the point value that you would get for your building. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the higher your mode split, the higher the number of points that you can get. And the higher your response rate, the higher the percentage of those points you can receive. And so this gives you a more specific feel of what we're talking about. If you had, and again, I think in almost any community, you could probably get 10% of the people to not drive their cars. I mean, I think the national standard is like 14 or 15%. So I think right off the bat, almost no matter where you are, you can help a property get 3 or 4 points with very little effort, as long as you're giving them a really solid survey instrument and getting a very high response rate. And then you can see as you get higher up, and for those folks that may either be in an urban area where a high mode split, high non-SOV mode split is more commonplace, or someplace that just has a stellar TDM program, you could get up to 15 points. And so you can see the range goes up in essentially 5% increments. With each 5% increments, you get essentially an additional point. And I think this is what folks were referring to earlier. What if you check the box on that you do TDM programs? And I think we're referring to option 3. and said that you had a comprehensive alternative transportation program and weren't really doing it. Well, here are the kind of things that you would check the box about, that you do some form of education, basic support, or strategies. And on the education side, here, I guess, thank you. Anything from new hire orientation to employee communications, carpool, vanpool matching, websites, employer carpool, and vanpool events. These are all things from an education standpoint that would qualify. Basic support, guaranteed ride home, preferential parking. Sorry, let me move the arrow here. Flex time, ride matching services. And then you can see on the direct strategies all the things that we do on a regular basis to help a particular work site. So, excuse me, in order to get the points, you need to meet the requirements of option 1, which is to do the survey and include at least one from each of the categories that are here, the education, the basic support, and the direct strategies. I see a question came up, do they get more points if they offer more than one for each strategy, or is it based solely on mode split? And so in this case, my understanding is that you max out at the 2 points. So whether you did everything that's bulleted out here or you just did one in each of the categories, it still ends up being the same. So again, just to pull it all together, I mentioned this earlier, 15 of your 40 points can come from TDM and get you base certification. If you're going for silver, 15 of the 50 points, gold 15 of 60, and platinum 15 of the 80, so a very significant portion. Sarah, a little help on this one. When we do the pod question, is this more of an open-ended dialogue when we talk about answering this?
Yeah, and I guess, people could basically just type in, some of their thoughts and ideas on that. It is more of a conversation or chat.
Okay. And I'll leave the conversation going. I see that I'm blabbing and running on a little bit, so I'll let you guys type that in. How might you work with your local government to position green building programs so that you can do these types of things? I'm sure other folks would like to see that as well. So I mentioned earlier, one of my goals, and it's probably because I'm inherently lazy, is that I want people calling me. I don't want to be calling people to help them with LEED. And so one way to do it, Peggy gave that link that is in the chat box at the bottom, basically describing where you can go in and proactively find buildings that may be looking to get LEED certified and haven't quite gotten there yet, and you can help them get their points. The other thing that you can do is have folks come to you. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, TDMI, the Transportation Demand Institute, pulled together a web portal that allows folks like all of us on the phone to list your organization so that folks can essentially, in the development community and the property management community who are seeking LEED certification, can find us. We don't have to go out and find them. Now you're thinking, okay, well that's great. You put together a website. How does that drive them to us? Well, we spent a considerable amount of time working with the U.S. Green Building Council, and if you were to go on their page and search up alternative transportation points, and I might be able to do that. I think, Phil, is that your website that's coming up? There's a link under resources that comes to this TDMI website. And so anybody who would be seeking these points, looking for more information about it, looking for some help, would find that this is really the primary link. That logo that you saw at the top right is on the LEED website. While we're waiting for that, I guess there we go. That's a beautiful scene there, Phil. I love those mountains. All right. Cool. So I think I can grab this now. So if you were to click transportation2.org is the website that you'll see up on the screen right now. And you'll see that pretty prominently, it's the one big green tab that's on there, is the Green Building Resources. And this is where there's a direct link to anybody that wants to be listed as a TDM service provider. So what I'd like to do first is just show you how it shows up so that you can see what you're getting into. Again, this page has a direct link from U.S. Green Building Council for people seeking certification. And you can see that all the different organizations that are listed on it have taken the time to fill out the registration form about the different types of experience they have with TDM types of things that are relevant to LEED. And you can see that the experience listings are things like implementing a TDM programs, bicycle accommodation, parking, meaning things like, this is more on the infrastructure side, but have you done things like provide plans to help put in bike racks and bike storage? There's things like parking management plan. Have you helped pull together a plan that has gotten things like carpools and electric vehicles and other things installed? And so depending on the extent of the experience you have in each of those areas, the system automates a series of stars that you saw on the previous page that give you a feel for how much experience this particular organization has in that area. Right now the listings are showing everybody because we've got everybody can fit on one page, but over time this won't show all the vendors, and so people will be doing thank you, Phil, making a selection on the jurisdiction that is most relevant to you. And so if you happen to be, I guess you're in Kentucky, Franklin County, Kentucky. To see, I don't know if anybody's registered there, but certainly in Maryland, I know we've got a bunch of folks that are doing this type of stuff. Maybe Montgomery County, Phil, would be great. You can see that North Bethesda TMD and Wells and Associates both provide this type of service, and you could click on that link as Phil was doing, and click on North Bethesda. That would be great. And you can see that Peggy is the point of contact for North Bethesda TMD, and you get a little more information about how that organization that has those criteria that you might be looking for to help you with your LEED certification can help you out. And so not only does it have Peggy's contact information, but a little more specifics on the types of TDM services that she and her organization have implementing that type of stuff. I saw a question pop up, and I had a full screen so I couldn't see it. How do employers and developers get to this site? How is it promoted? So that is a great question. So we have been promoting it on the TDM listserv. We've been promoting it through ACT for our community to get on it. The developers, we are working through a number of different channels to get them listed on it as well. And so one, again, the U.S. Green Building Council's website itself is one way to do it. Over time, once we get enough of the TDM industry in this website so that we have a substantial listing, we're going to start reaching out to other organizations. Future webinar topics are going to be on STARS, with ASHI's certification program for universities, as well as the best workplaces for commuter sites. So all of these other entities that have these types of recognition programs will have links to this site as well, basically saying if you're looking for somebody to help you with this, come to this website. Right now it's only focused on those folks seeking LEED. But you'll be seeing a lot more of the promotion. Honestly, part of what we want to do, it's a great question, Lisa K., but part of what we're trying to do is build this database so that it's respectable, so that some developer coming to it sees more than 3 people. Right now we've got about 7 or 8 organizations. Our goal is to get it up to 25 here in the next couple months so that we have a reputable number in there to work with. And so right now what you're seeing Phil scroll through is what the actual registration form is like and the questions that you have to answer. Now this should be no problem for anybody on this call. What we wanted to do is weed out fly-by-night organizations that want to get some lead business but really don't have the qualifications to be doing it. And so you'll see there's a number of questions you need to answer about the types of services that you offer with regard to TDM. And then we look for a reference. And again, most of the folks on this call, that's not a huge issue. We know if you're a public entity, the type of TDM program you do. But for smaller organizations that we may not be aware of, it helps for us to have a reference so that we can follow up and say, can you tell us a little more about the work that this organization has done for you with regard to TDM for lead? And so right now, this is free, at least through the end of the year, and there may be some discussion about extending that a little longer. But the idea is to get you guys to try it out and hopefully see if you get some leads generated by having your organization listed in this. So again, our goal is to get people in the development and property management community coming to you instead of you knocking on their doors. All right. We have minutes left and a few more slides. Any questions on the, I guess you guys can type them in. So this is essentially the way that you can get listed. And again, these are the kinds of things that we'll be looking to highlight. If you're doing parking, as we're asking about your experience with parking management, have you done a parking management plan? Has that plan been used to get certification for a building? Has the building been certified? The more that it has done to get a building LEED certified, the more points you get toward more stars. Obviously, we need that project reference and a location so that we can verify that you actually have those credentials. With the bicycle accommodation category you saw there in the stars earlier, have you done anything that as a bicycle accommodation plan where you've helped get bike racks installed or bike storage space installed? Same thing goes with shower and changing facilities. Have you been involved with a building to help identify locations and help create the design elements that would get that? These TDM basic support point opportunities are the kind of stuff we do all the time, and so probably your organization can piggyback on what's going on in the region to take advantage of that. So if you have a guaranteed ride home in your region, that would count. But preferential parking for rideshare participants, have you helped folks with that? Have you helped set up flex time? Have you done any type of ride matching or have a means to connect people to that? In terms of implementing TDM strategies, have you done any work with parking fees or parking cash out or transit subsidies, van pools, telework? Again, this is the stuff that all of us do on a daily basis. This shouldn't be too much trouble for you all to justify. And then on the education part, have you done new hire orientation, employee communications, ride matching, employer events? Peggy and I and Phil and Sarah spent a lot of time actually developing the criteria for this website and trying to identify what are the things that make a TDM professional so that we can say that if you do enough of these things, you get points. I see a question here. So I guess before we go to the homework exercise, the question is, do you still have to get a sign-off from a property manager or developer to be officially certified? The fact that you work on those programs for their building. So I think the best way to describe that is, ideally we'd like to have a reference that we could call and say, in this case, Stephanie said that she did a bike accommodation plan for a building. And we could say, call up that developer and say, hey, developer, did Stephanie help you with that? And if we wanted to get into it, we could say, did the bicycle accommodation plan help your site ultimately get lead points? And if it did, that would certainly qualify you to take credit for having offered that type of service. So hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, hopefully folks can hear me here, but if there was a time for the sound to go out, it's with 2 minutes left in the presentation. So there are two things I think we wanted to hit on. One is the homework exercise, and as much as it's homework, I think this is really, it's good for you. This is what my daughter's teachers would tell her in middle school. This homework is good for you, but this really is good for you. This is really to get you registered on the transportation2.org website. We want to give you exposure. And the more of the reputable organizations like all of you we have on that site, the easier it is to sell it to other organizations to link to it, and the more business that will ultimately come to us because more people will be visiting the site. So, depending on how long, how much effort you want to put into it, I would say give yourself about 45 minutes to fill it out. I think the hardest part I've found is trying to track down who you could use as a reference to put in there and what their contact information. But you'll know, obviously, all the kinds of services that you've done. The hard part is tracking down and putting in the references. But I can tell you that it will certainly be 45 minutes well spent. I know that next time, one of the things we wanted to talk about but didn't have enough time this time is tips for getting effective lead compliance surveys. We alluded to the fact that the higher the response rate you get, you can take full advantage of the points that the building would receive for its mode share. And so what we want to do is help you understand how can you ensure that you get that minimum 60% response rate, or that 60 to 80 window, so that you can get that full point value, because nothing would be worse than knowing you could have had 15 points, but in reality, because of your response rate, you can only get 5. And so I think I'll turn it back to Sarah, because I think next time that will be part of the discussion, along with some other ways that recognition and lead kind of go together, as well as the survey and lead and recognition go together.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Justin. I think that we had some great discussion and a lot of good questions. Our initial idea was to talk about surveys, but we can do that next time. So next time we're going to talk about the ASHE STARS program and the Best Workplaces for Commuters, Best Sites program, as well as the surveys. Till then, if you have any questions, you can contact Justin, Peggy, or myself. Here are the email addresses. So thank you so much for your attention. Please fill out the evaluation that you can find on your screen. And so we will see you then, or so-called see you next Wednesday, September 7th at noon to 1 Eastern Time for part 2 of this module. So thanks a lot for your attention, and we'll talk next week. Bye-bye.